Good evening, everybody. I'm Delia Kay. I'm the Natural Resources Director for the town, and I want to thank you all for coming out in person and for joining on the webinar. I will say that this is the first time that I've run a webinar, so I've done a number of Zoom meetings, but I have not done a webinar. So bear with me if we have some pauses as I try to figure out how to get people to speak at the Q&A session. I'd like to introduce the project team. Bert Comans is the Assistant Natural Resources Director. Anna McEwen is our Recreation Director. Justin Richardson is on Zoom. He's our Assistant Town Engineer. And our consultants from EA Engineering, we have Alex Patterson, who is an ecologist and the project manager for this project. And also Nazifa, I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce, Sarawat, one of the engineers working on the project. So the purpose of tonight's forum is to provide an overview of the problems facing Warner's Pond, describe efforts to date that have been to address the problems, provide restoration alternatives, and obtain community input. I think many of you are aware that Warner's Pond has been filling in for decades, and invasive plants dominate the system, degrading the ecological value of the pond and diminishing recreational opportunities. A watershed management plan prepared in 2012 identified targeted dredging as an effective long-term approach to accomplishing the project goals of restoring the ecological health and recreational opportunities at the pond, and permits for this approach were secured last year. $2.5 million has been appropriated to accomplish the project, and the project was put out to bid last fall, with one bid received in the amount of $9.5 million. Yes, recognizing that targeted dredging was no longer a cost-effective restoration approach, we are now considering two additional alternatives. The first being to remove the Warner's Pond Dam, and the second, a modified dredging approach. Restoration of Warner's Pond is not only a natural resources consideration. There are larger community interests at stake, including the soon-to-be completed Giroux Park and the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, as well as future considerations of climate change and sustainability. Towards a shared community vision, we are working closely with engineering and recreation staff for their input and expertise, as well as your input and feedback on the best approach for the Warner's Pond system and watershed. We've mailed out a survey to all Concord residents and have a few hard copies here at the table. And we would love to get as much community feedback as we can get. At about 5:30 this afternoon, we had received 117 responses. But Anna's recreation survey is over 200, so it's not a competition, but it kind of is. So if you haven't yet had an opportunity to fill that out, we have the link on our webpage under the Natural Resources Division, also under Warner's Pond. It's under news and notices, but it's now kind of buried a little bit. And then I also do have hard copies for those people who would much prefer to not do the online version. We will be, let's see, following this community meeting and completion of the survey, Alex and his team will develop conceptual designs for each approach, compile the public comments, prepare cost estimates, and develop an alternatives analysis to be presented at a second community meeting in the spring. We hope that you will complete the survey, and all survey responses that are received by 5 o'clock on March 15th will be included in the alternatives analysis report. Minuteman Media is here filming the event, and it will be posted to the YouTube channel in a few days. So if you know somebody who was not able to attend, that will be another option for people to view the presentation, hear the Q&A after the presentation. And we will also post a PDF of this presentation on the Natural Resources webpage. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Alex. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Delia, for that introduction. As Delia mentioned, my name is Alex Patterson. I'm an ecologist and a project manager at EA Engineering, Science and Technology. And we are the town of Concord's consultant for the alternative analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to give you a quick overview of kind of the structure of this presentation. First, we're just gonna give a really quick sort of summary of why we're all here, what's going on with Warner's Pond. I'll talk a little bit about the backgrounds of some of the issues that have been going on at the pond. I'm sure a lot of folks here are aware of those. To get everybody sort of up to speed, we'll kind of review the concept of how we're thinking about restoration of the system and what the goals of this process are. And then talk a little bit about the alternatives that we are reviewing as part of this process, and then the next steps. Oh, sure. Good idea. Can people hear me better? Great, thank you. Okay, so I think Delia pretty much covered all this already, but just sort of big picture, Town of Concord has partnered with EA to complete an analysis of alternatives to restore the ecological, recreational, and community functions and values of the Warner's Pond Neshoba Brook system. And this alternatives analysis is being done to provide information to the town and its residents and other stakeholders with regard to the pros and cons of the alternatives that are being considered. And this information is really being developed to assist the town in the decision-making process for how the project ultimately moves forward. Obtaining feedback from the community is obviously a really important part of this process. That's why we're all here tonight. And the scope of the alternatives analysis, as Delia mentioned, includes 3 different alternatives: a dredging and sediment relocation alternative, dam removal, and no action. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a little bit of background on the pond, just to get us all sort of up to speed. So for those who don't know, Warner's Pond is located in West Concord, pretty close to the Acton town line. It was created in its current form in 1857 when a dam was built on Neshoba Brook. Prior to that, there had been a couple of smaller dams with a much smaller ponds behind them. But the pond as it exists now has been there since 1857. It's about 54 acres in size. That includes 3 islands that are about 7.5 acres. And it's about 12 feet deep in the deepest part, which is kind of in the far northern cove. But most of the pond is about 5 feet or less in depth. And the pond is owned by the Town of Concord, which also owns the dam and 3 public access locations around the pond, including the Giroux Recreation Area. And then lastly, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail passes along the northern side of the pond. You can see that in that image on the bottom. Next slide, please. So Warner's Pond has been undergoing a process called eutrophication since as early as at least the 1980s is kind of when we have the earliest documentation of this. And so eutrophication is a process that occurs in lakes and ponds. It's a natural process that occurs in all water bodies, but it's often very much accelerated by human development within watersheds. And essentially, it's characterized by sediment filling in the pond basin slowly over time, which leads to excessive plant growth due to the high nutrient levels contained in the sediment. And again, over relatively long periods of time in sort of quote unquote natural systems and potentially shorter periods of time in human altered systems, this eventually leads to a loss of open water volume in the pond as sort of the basin is slowly filled in with sediment. Plants grow and then die back each year, which helps contribute to the sediment within the pond. And so the two pictures on this slide on the top just show an image of the pond in April, sort of before the growing season, and then in June, sort of in the early portion of the growing season. And you can see that greenish color on the surface is aquatic plants growing in the pond. And so again, we have documentation of this being the case since the early 80s, potentially longer. But this condition has worsened over the decades and has led to several impairments, the main ones being impaired recreational value due to the shallow water depths and dense plant growths, degraded habitat for fish and wildlife, and water quality impairments. The pond is listed as impaired by DEP due to the presence of aquatic invasives. And again, the process of eutrophication is really characterized by an accumulation of nutrient-rich sediments that reduce water depths in the pond. And we'll keep coming back to this because it's a pretty important concept for understanding sort of the cause of the problems here, and in turn, the potential solutions to those problems. And so a key nutrient in this whole process is phosphorus, which is really what's fueling plant growth. And so that's contained within the sediments that flow into the pond from its watershed. And it's also dissolved in the water column. Next slide, please. So just a summary of some studies and management actions that have been taking place in Warner's Pond over the years. So I mentioned the early 80s. So this fishery survey by Mass Wildlife is kind of an early source of information documenting the fact that the pond was basically full of aquatic plants. There's a report from the state that states that from the early 80s. So in the late 90s, the town actually developed a management plan for the pond that mainly was focused on managing growths of aquatic plants. And based on the recommendations in that report, there were a series of different efforts to reduce aquatic plant density in the pond, beginning in the late 90s and up through the present. Those have included herbicide treatments, mechanical harvesting, hydro raking, and hand pulling of water chestnut, which is the thing that has been kind of ongoing more recently than those other efforts. In 2011, there was an herbicide treatment done and a follow-up survey of the pond. And in 2012, after sort of undertaking these aquatic plant management efforts for over 10 years and not seeing kind of significant benefits, the town sort of took a step back and looked at the issue from a more holistic point of view. And that was sort of what the watershed management plan was designed to do. Sort of take a step back and get a better handle on kind of what are the causes of the issues and some of the potential solutions that the town should be looking at. And so the watershed management plan resulted in a number of important findings that are helping guide the decisions about how to manage the pond even now. And most of those are related to sort of the reality of the sediment and nutrient loading to the pond. So some of the key takeaways from the watershed management plan were that phosphorus loading to Warner's Pond is about 5.5 tons per year. So each year, about 5.5 tons of phosphorus is deposited within Warner's Pond. So to put that in perspective, the watershed management plan calculated that the permissible load for phosphorus is about 1/2 of a ton per year. And so permissible load means that if the loading were below that number, we wouldn't expect there to be water quality issues within the pond. And conversely, the critical load is about 1 ton per year. And what that means is that if loading is more than the critical load, we are almost certain to have water quality problems. So there's kind of this, if we were under 1/2 of a ton, we would be okay. If we're over 1 ton, we're probably not good. And based on the calculations in the watershed management plan, we're over 6 times higher than the critical load. And in addition, the watershed management plan determined that based on the modeling that was done, even if there was an 80% reduction in phosphorus loading to Warner's Pond, so basically if all the watershed sources of phosphorus that are contributing that nutrient into the pond could be reduced by 80%, that the in-pond levels would still remain well above the critical load just due to the amount of phosphorus that's already been deposited in the pond. So based on this analysis, the watershed management plan focused on 2 long-term options to consider. One was watershed-based approaches, so basically trying to reduce nutrient loading to the pond. And the other was sediment removal through dredging. Next slide, please. And so what we learned from the watershed management plan is that the cause of the problem is really sort of a confluence of 2 different factors that are interacting. One is the sediment loading from the pond's watershed, which is shown in the image on the left. And Warner's Pond just happens to have a very large watershed relative to the size of the pond itself. It's over 600 times larger than the pond, which is an extremely large ratio of watershed area to pond area. And the other factor is presence of the dam, which if in the absence of the dam being there, the sediment loading to this to the resource would just continue to flow downstream and wouldn't be accumulating in the basin as it does now. So it's kind of these 2 different things that are working together to kind of cause the problems. Next slide, please. So as Delia mentioned, the watershed management plan, like I said, kind of evaluated these 2 different approaches, watershed-based approaches and dredging. And the outcome of that analysis was essentially that trying to undertake a watershed-based approach to solve the problems at Warner's Pond was very unlikely to be successful due to a number of factors, including the size of the pond's watershed, the fact that almost all of it is outside of Concord, and just the amount of sediment loading that's already occurred in the pond. So the recommendation at that time was to focus on dredging. And based on that, a dredging project was designed that would have removed about 35,000 cubic yards of material from about a 6-acre area within the pond. Last year, the town secured permits to do that work and put the project out to bid, as Delia summarized. And the bids that came back were significantly higher than the appropriated funding. And a large driver of that cost was related to the need to basically take the material away and put it somewhere else. So there would have been a significant effort to store and dewater the material next to the pond and then transport it to a different location to dispose of it. So at that point, the town sort of went back to the drawing board and said, you know, how can we move something forward to improve conditions here? And so one part of that was, you know, how could we do a dredging project within the funding level that's available? And, you know, the way that that could be done would be to not transport the material elsewhere, but keep it within the pond, which would significantly reduce the costs of dredging. But that cost reduction also comes with a reduction in the scale of the benefits because the material isn't actually being removed from the pond. It's just being relocated somewhere else. And then there was also a thought of, you know, is there some other option that we should be considering that hasn't been considered before? And that's how the possibility of removing the dam kind of came into play. So just a little background on kind of how we got to where we are. Next slide, please. So in thinking about sort of the concept of restoring Warner's Pond, I wanted to include this slide to sort of just provide a framework for sort of how the process could play out and sort of where we are in this process. So taking all the information that we sort of reviewed up to now and kind of putting it in this framework of a restoration concept. And so, you know, it really begins with observing impairments. So someone has to say, you know, there's a problem with this system that is causing us to lose some functions or values that we want. And then the second step would be to understand what's causing that problem. And then 3 is designing a solution that addresses the cause of the problem. And that's really where we are right now in this process. So once a solution is identified that addresses the cause of the impairments, the next step would be to implement the solution and then ideally sort of let the system heal itself once the stressors have been removed. And the reason for that is really to just kind of allow the system to take on the form that it sort of naturally wants to be in, and that minimizes the need for kind of continuous interventions that would otherwise be needed to sort of get it to be something that it may not be trying to be. And then lastly, just kind of long-term monitoring to determine whether any adaptive management is needed to make sure that the goals are being achieved. Next slide, please. So again, the first step is kind of observing the impairments to the system. And so we've already talked about these a little bit, but there are some that we haven't talked about yet. So, you know, reduced water depths and extensive growth of aquatic invasive species. You know, those are pretty obvious if you visit Warner's Pond in the summer. And those things degrade habitat for fish and wildlife and impair recreational opportunities on the pond. There's other impairments to the system that are also present. Restriction of movement of aquatic organisms. So fish passage basically from the Assabet River into Neshoba Brook is currently not possible due to the dam. And then also, you know, public safety risk and ongoing costs to the town associated with just maintaining this infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the second step is gaining an understanding of the cause of impairments. And again, we sort of already reviewed this, but just putting it in this framework, you know, there's kind of really 3 things There's kind of the ongoing sediment and nutrient loading from the watershed, which is sort of happening all the time. There's the sediment accumulation that's already happened within the pond. So the pond already has a significant volume of nutrient-rich sediments that have been deposited there. And then the presence of the dam, which is both preventing the sediment from moving downstream and also resulting in some of those other impairments like fish passage and the ongoing burden of the infrastructure. Next slide, please. And so, like I said, we're right now we're in the third step of this process, which is trying to identify and design a solution. And to kind of inform that process, it's important to understand what the goals of restoration are. And these are the goals that the town has identified. They're sort of broken out into ecological, recreational, and community goals. And this is what the town is hoping to achieve by undertaking a restoration project at Warner's Pond. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about the alternatives that are actually being considered. And again, I said I would keep coming back to this, and because I think it's important to kind of put into context why we're looking at the alternatives that we are, and sort of why they're potentially suitable for addressing the problems. So again, the impairments are due to these kind of three factors. The current sediment and nutrient loading to the pond is over 6 times higher than the limit where water quality impairments would be expected. But even if those that loading could be reduced by 80%, in pond levels would still likely remain well above the critical load due to the sediment loading that's already occurred. And then also the dam, again, which is stopping what would otherwise be the natural movement of sediment through Neshoba Brook and into downstream waters. Next slide, please. And so with the understanding that kind of these are the causes of the impairments, it kind of elucidates the idea that to effectively address these impairments, a restoration project has to do one of these two things. Either drastically reduce the sediment loading to the pond and remove nutrient-rich sediments which have already accumulated in the pond, or just prevent sediment accumulation in the first place by removing the barrier that is preventing sediments from naturally flowing downstream. Next slide, please. And so on here we have 6 different alternatives listed that could potentially be thought of as things that could happen at Warner's Pond. But 3 of these were rejected for the reasons that are shown on the slide. So just aquatic plant management, so herbicide treatments, harvesting, drawdown, really are addressing a symptom of the problem rather than the problem itself. They're a long-term commitment. There's a number of kind of characteristics of the pond, including a really high flushing rate that would likely limit the effectiveness of doing these efforts. And again, the town has a history of trying to do aquatic plant management at Warner's Pond with little benefit that's been documented. Again, a dredging project where the sediment is actually removed from the pond, while that would be beneficial, is, as we've learned, far too costly. And watershed-based approaches, so basically trying to reduce sediment and nutrient loading through engineered and kind of non-engineered methods within the watershed is, really logistically and economically infeasible due to the size of the watershed, due to the fact that almost all the watershed is outside of Concord, making it really difficult for the town to have any kind of impact on what's happening in other communities. And also this wouldn't address the nutrients that are already in the pond. Next slide, please. So based on sort of this understanding, that's why we're focused on these three options as part of this analysis. So next slide, please. So now I'll sort of give an overview of these three alternatives and kind of what they consist of. So starting with the dredging and relocation. So the idea was to kind of focus on the area of the pond that's between the Giroux Recreation Area and Commonwealth Ave, with the thinking being that those are kind of the two primary access points. So it would make sense to improve the area that people would be accessing from those locations. The volume of material that could be dredged is really constrained by two things. One is cost, but the other is just room to store this material elsewhere within the basin. Like I said, in order to do a dredging project that is within the funding levels that are available, the material needs to be put somewhere else within the pond. And so we looked at a few options and sort of what the most beneficial sort of configuration would be. And it comes out to a dredge area of a little over 4 acres to a maximum depth of about 10 feet, which is pretty close to the current deep hole of the pond, and a volume of about 14,000 cubic yards. And so the material would be placed in two different locations within the pond. One is about a 3.2 acre section of the pond and along the northwestern shoreline. And the other is about a 3 acre area in the southwestern cove. And in that area, sediment would be placed such that we would be expecting a shallow emergent marsh community to form in what is now open water. And then in addition, we included some recreational improvements, a new recreational dock at the Giroux Park, which for those that recall, the Giroux design originally included some water access that was later removed. So this would provide access to the pond from Giroux. And it also includes some access improvements at Commonwealth Ave. Next slide, please. So this is a conceptual drawing of what that project would be. So the blue area on the right is the dredging footprint. Again, a maximum depth of about 10 feet. And then the two tannish colored areas on the left are where sediment would be placed. So in the bottom left, again, that area would be converted from what is now pretty shallow open water to an emergent wetland. And in the upper left, we're expecting that area would continue to be open water. It wouldn't convert to a marsh, but water depth would be decreased by placing 9,000 cubic yards of sediment in that area. Next slide, please. So this is a conceptual rendering of what the dredging alternative would look like. Really, the main there's kind of two areas here that are different from what it would look like now. And those are sort of on the left-hand side of the pond where there's kind of like an L shape. Right now, that area is fairly shallow, and so it would have that same kind of greenish tinge to it from plant growth, and you can see that it's more of a darker blue color, signifying that water depths there are deeper. And then kind of in the back right-hand corner of the image, you can see where an emergent marsh community is present, where now it would be shallow open water. Next slide, please. So we also, as part of this process, have been sort of evaluating pros and cons of all the different alternatives. So the main benefits of the dredging and relocation alternative are that it would provide a positive impact to recreational opportunities within the dredge footprint by deepening the water depths, removing aquatic invasive species, and kind of providing a connection between those two access locations. It would also establish 3 acres of new vegetated wetlands in the pond's southwestern cove. There's potential benefits to water quality and fish habitat, but at the same time, the fact that the material is being placed elsewhere in the pond could mean that the scope of those benefits is somewhat lessened by sort of making the water shallower in other areas. And then sort of the primary downsides, so this work would create an increase in suspended solids in the water column due to the dredging and filling construction work. This would be temporary, but that would certainly be something that would occur. There would be direct mortality of shellfish and benthic organisms within both the dredging and relocation footprints. And then just, some other considerations. The scale of the dredging is relatively small due to the cost constraints and the limited area available to store the sediment. There are some logistical challenges associated with this alternative, just with regard to sort of moving the material and kind of getting it to stay where we want it to be. And, lastly, sort of the benefits, may ultimately be marginal in relation to the costs, just due to some of the challenges related to the alternative. And it's not a permanent solution. The dredge area, would eventually refill due to the ongoing sediment loading to the pond. And, at that point, any available room to relocate sediments would have already been occupied by this project. So a future dredge project would need to move the sediment elsewhere at a much higher cost. Next slide, please. So we also have developed sort of conceptual level cost estimates. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but essentially the estimate is roughly 2.6 million. We sort of put a low and a high range on that number that ranges from about 2.2 to about 3.4 million. Our goal for both of these alternatives was to design something that was under $3 million in total cost. And so that's kind of part of what was taken into account here. Next slide, please. So the dam removal alternative. So just an overview of sort of what that would entail. Basically, about 4,700 linear feet of stream channel would be restored. We're expecting a channel width of about 40 feet, which is similar to Neshoba Brook upstream and downstream of the pond. About 35 acres of what is now Warner's Pond would be reestablished as native wetland communities, and about 4.5 acres would actually remain as open water in the pond's deep hole. Again, some recreational improvements, that same dock at Giroux to provide water access And since there would no longer be access to the water from Commonwealth Ave or Pond Street, this alternative includes observation platforms to provide a way to sort of enjoy the resource from those town-owned access points. There would also need to be an effort to sort of monitor and adaptively manage this project in the long term, just to make sure that the goals of the restoration are being achieved. And so that could entail any of those actions that are listed on the slide. Next slide, please. So this is a conceptual level drawing of what the dam removal alternative would look like. For anyone who's familiar with Google Earth and how you can kind of scroll back in time and look at old aerial photographs, if you do that at Warner's Pond and look at some summertime images, you can actually see the main flow path of Neshoba Brook through the pond, because it's kind of the one place where there isn't really dense aquatic plant growth. And based on the bathymetry survey we did of the pond over the winter, this is roughly the alignment of Neshoba Brook that would, sort of reform if the dam were to be removed. Again, you can see that deeper open water area. And the new wetland habitats that would form within the former impoundment. Next slide, please. So this is just sort of a close-up view. Obviously we're cognizant of the fact that part of the reason that the Juro recreation area, part of the rationale for its development, I guess, was that it was next to Warner's Pond. So this is just providing sort of a concept of sort of what the park will ultimately look like in the context of the dam removal alternative. So that orange line is where the original dock associated with Juro would have been and would be under this alternative, providing access to the open water area that's remaining there. And so that kind of green margin, the darker green margin along the fringe is sort of what is wetland, emergent wetland right now. And then the lighter green is what is open water right now, but would be wetland in the future. And then the blue is open water that would remain. So it just gives you sort of a sense of how the Juro recreation area kind of would be configured in the context of the dam removal alternative. Next slide, please. And so this is the conceptual rendering of the dam removal alternative. Again, you can see the alignment of Neshoba Brook winding its way through the open water area and the dock at Juro. Next slide, please. So as far as the pros and cons, the ecological benefits of the dam removal alternative are pretty significant. 35 new acres of new wetland habitat that would be restored. The restoration of fish passage through Neshoba Brook. It would really, for the most part, take care of the existing aquatic invasive plant issue in the pond by removing suitable habitat. And then we would also expect recreational benefits through the ability to now paddle, for example, from Juro to the Aspet River and back, which isn't currently possible without portaging. And of course, improving fish passage would improve opportunities for fishing. We would expect water quality improvements due to restoring the natural flow patterns. And then, of course, removing sort of that infrastructure liability to the town. There's also a potential that the dam removal alternative could help alleviate flooding. There would need to be more modeling done to to really say this for certain, but removing the dam could shrink the extent of 100-year floodplain. So some of the homes on Commonwealth Ave that are currently in the 100-year floodplain could no longer be if the dam were to be removed. But again, that would have to be confirmed through modeling. And then finally, there's a significant amount of interest in dam removal from funding agencies at this time. And so there's a potential that a large amount of the project cost could be offset by securing state and or federal grants. There are some things that may or may not be cons depending on sort of personal preference. Obviously, the pond would be significantly reduced in size from about 40 acres to about 5 acres. There would be changes in the visual characteristics. So instead of seeing kind of an open water body, you would see a wetland ecosystem with a river flowing through it. And then, of course, changes in recreational opportunities. There would no longer be access to the water from Commonwealth Ave, but we would have access from Giroux. Also impacts to mussels and other benthic organisms, similar to the dredging alternative. Next slide, please. So again, I won't spend a lot of time going through all the costs. They're relatively similar to the dam removal alternative. The sort of mid-range estimate is about 2.5 million with a range of about 2.1 to 3.3 million. But unlike the dredging alternative, like I mentioned, there are significant sources of funding available to support dam removals. I won't list all these, of course, but these are some examples of state and federal programs that are supporting dam removals through grants. And so just sort of a side-by-side of these two renderings, just to give a sense of sort of the difference in visual changes. On the right, we have kind of a couple examples of what the new habitats could look like. The top one is sort of meant to represent what the new emergent marsh in the southwestern cove could look like, with sort of the pond behind it. And then the bottom image, potentially sort of the restored wetland communities sort of looking across what's now the impoundment. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we also are considering a no action alternative. That's a much shorter discussion because it involves no action. Basically, it maintains the status quo in the short term. In the medium to long term, conditions would be expected to continue to deteriorate. The ability of the pond to provide functions and benefits would continue to decline due to dense plant growth and infilling from sediment. Eventually, shallow areas of the pond will sort of naturally transition to vegetated wetlands as sediment accumulation continues, and areas that are deeper now will eventually become shallower. The primary benefit, of course, is avoiding any costs or sort of the effort involved with taking an action. Although the town would continue to incur the costs associated with maintaining and repairing the dam. This image is just an aerial view of the pond from last summer. So you can actually see that kind of alignment of Neshoba Brook that I mentioned, kind of coming in from the west, and then it takes a sharp curve to the northeast, enters that kind of one deeper area in the northern side of the pond, and then kind of snakes its way down the east side to the dam, which is in the far southeastern corner of the image. Next slide, please. And so lastly, next steps. So as Delia mentioned, we're working on this evaluation and are going to be generating a report this spring. Once that's finalized, there'll be another meeting to sort of discuss the findings and solicit feedback again. At that point, it's really the town's decision as how to move forward. And if one project does move forward, the next steps in that process would be advancing the design, going through permitting, and then implementation. As Julia mentioned, community input is a really important part of this process. So there's a QR code and a link on this slide to the survey. So encourage everybody to take that if you haven't already. And again, any responses we receive by 5 p.m. on March 15th will be included in the summary that will be provided in the final report. Next slide, please. And so that's all we have for the presentation. Julia, I don't know how you want to moderate questions, but.
So I think what I would like to do, there are a number of questions in the chat, but I think I would like to start with any questions from the audience that we have here this evening. And I'm going to go through and read through, once we get through the public comments, I'll read through. I think some of the questions that are in the chat have been answered by the presentation.
Okay.
But we'll go through those afterwards. And Paul, I see that you have your hand up.
Hi, I'm Paul, speechless. I'm Paul Baum, 11 Ridgewood Road. You had estimated that about 5.4 tons of phosphorus enter the pond. My question is on the dredging of the 4 acres of sediment against the other sources. You have a watershed source and you have more sediments, maybe 40 acres of sediments. My question is, what percentage of the problem do you think you're reducing in the dredging plan that you presented?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so part of it is ideally, right, we would want to just take those nutrient rich sediments out of the pond completely and remove them from the system. That's not possible based on, the cost considerations that we talked about. So really, what the dredging alternative that we're evaluating now is doing is taking a certain volume of sediments and just moving them somewhere else within the pond. So as far as sort of, I guess, the question is sort of what percentage of the accumulated sediment that's in the pond now would be moved under that alternative.
Well, it's more what percentage of the 5.4 tons do you think you'd be reducing by pulling out the sediments? Is it half the load or 20%?
Well, so the 5.5 tons is sort of the annual loading to the pond every year.
Yeah.
So the dredging alternative wouldn't impact that number at all. So that sediment loading from the watershed is going to continue. Sort of the dredging project won't impact that. All that it would do is take sediments that are in the pond now and move them somewhere else.
But I thought part of the 5.4 was the sediment loading to the ponds. I'm not correct.
Can we go back to that slide, Bert? Yeah, so what the watershed management plan calculated was that every year, so Warner's Pond is kind of a dead end of this network of streams that are flowing into it, right, from its watershed. And so it's sort of the end of this network of streams that are transporting sediments downstream until they enter the pond and then are kind of deposited there. And so in that load of sediment that's entering the pond every year, there's about 5.5 tons of phosphorus contained. Yeah, maybe the next slide after that one, Bert. Yeah, right there. So in that sediment load, contained within that is about 5.5 tons of phosphorus.
So that's entering the pond.
Entering the pond
Okay.
every year. So the dredging project wouldn't change that at all. The only way to change that would be to reduce sources of sedimentation in the watershed.
Okay,
What the dredging project would do is say, we're just trying to, without changing the net volume of sediments that are in the pond, kind of create a situation that is more beneficial for recreational purposes and maybe for water quality and fish habitat by kind of taking some sediment and moving it somewhere else, so that instead of having kind of a uniform kind of mid-range deep pond, we have kind of a deeper area and a shallower area. So you're getting some benefits by having that deeper area, but you're also giving up some benefits by having the shallower area.
second quick question. My understanding from reading is that the benefits of dredging are twofold. One is removing nutrients and also deepening the area so that the invasives don't have the light penetration. Is that still your thinking? of the benefit of Dredging.
So again, we're not removing nutrients from the system, because under this alternative, the sediment's just being relocated somewhere else in the pond. However, within the dredge footprint, we would expect there to be a reduction in aquatic plant growth due to number one, you're making the water deeper, which means sunlight can't penetrate to the bottom as well. Number two, you're taking away some of the soft sediments that the plants want to grow in and exposing the underlying coarse sediments that aren't as good of a medium for growth. And then also removing nutrients from that specific area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for a very excellent and candid presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, nice presentation. Dan Stapleton, 20 Conant Street. I just had a couple of questions about the dam removal option. So you talked a lot about the sort of dynamics of what happens on the dredging option, but given a lot of the watershed issues, could you speak a little bit about sort of forecasting the success of the wetlands and the newly created stream and the pond? The second question I had, which I know you're probably doing hydraulic modeling, but it just occurred to me watching this, is in the cost estimate, is there, when you remove the dam, you might be changing the hydraulics at the bridge and downstream by Neshoba, which are pretty unstable walls. They're old masonry walls. So I didn't know if that was going to be a potential sort of hydraulic issue with the dam. The dam mediates some of that flow now. So just pointing out, because those walls could be an issue at some point.
Yeah, and actually, if you're around for the dam reconstruction in 2008, when the temporary dam failed, there was actually a significant issue with erosion of that stone wall just downstream of the dam. So good questions. Neither of these alternatives have any impact on the sediment loading to the system. So the difference is that the dam removal alternative basically allows that sediment load to just sort of continue downstream in the way that it kind of naturally, wants to, quote unquote, and kind of removes the thing that's causing the pond to basically be sort of a depositional area for the sediment. So nutrient loading through Neshoba Brook will continue. And if the dam weren't there, then there would be less sediment deposition because the stream would just be able to flow naturally. There's certainly going to be a significant volume of nutrient-rich sediments that are going to persist in the footprint of the pond. But the goal would be to help establish sort of a native plant community within those areas, and by sort of helping flush out some of the sediments and just reducing the water depths, it would eliminate the aquatic invasives that are there now. As for the other question, so the next phase of the project, whichever alternative is selected, would definitely include hydraulic modeling to answer some of those questions. But in general, with dam removals, typically we don't see really significant issues with kind of increased flows causing infrastructure problems downstream. There would likely be some increased flow when the dam is immediately removed, but then after that, the system would pretty much stabilize. There's a good amount of flow that comes over the dam right now, so it's not like the stream isn't flowing downstream now, but future modeling would definitely answer those questions and help mitigate any issues that could arise.
Hi, Anna Feldwig. I live on Commonwealth Avenue. I just bought the house for the pond, but okay. I am wondering if you do the dredging, how long do you anticipate that will last? The effects of it will last?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's also a difficult one to answer without doing some fairly complex sediment transport modeling. We actually took a look at this for this presentation because we figured this question would come up, and so a really rough sort of back of the envelope number of how long would it take for 14,000 cubic yards of sediment to re-enter the pond, which is how much would be relocated in the dredging project. Based on the analyses that were done in the watershed management plan, I think it's somewhere between like 40 and 60 cubic yards of sediment is deposited in the pond every year. So if you just divide those numbers by 14,000, it comes out to like 200 to 300 years. But I just want to make it clear that that's not the same as how long will it take for this dredge footprint to fill back in. There's a lot of different factors that could influence that, and the actual number is likely to be less because the dredging footprint would be kind of a low spot where sediment wants to accumulate. It's also possible that the side slopes that are created could kind of slough off over time. So I don't have a great answer. It's basically something that would need to be modeled to have a more precise estimate.
Yeah, because that's important, right? Because how many times would we have to do this if it's once for 200 years?
Right.
That'd be awesome. My other question was about the dam. So I didn't know that it was rebuilt in 2008, but how concerned are we that it's going to fail if it was just rebuilt?
It was. So yeah, it was, I think there was a major rehabilitation done in 2008. I don't think there's any, immediate concern that the dam is going to fail. I think, that is more of a, as communities try to enhance their climate resilience, part of that is kind of looking at infrastructure and where potential vulnerabilities could exist. So dams are a big factor in that calculation. They obviously are, an inherent hazard because they're holding back a huge volume of water. So, while there's certainly no indication that the dam is at risk of failing anytime soon, it is just sort of a vulnerable piece of infrastructure that, comes into the equation when communities are looking at resilience and just kind of reducing that kind of hazard profile.
Okay. And the last question I had maybe is for you in the recreation department. I'm surprised at how many people use the pond. Like the day it freezes over, there's like 50 to 100 people ice skating and playing hockey, which is wonderful. There aren't that many ponds in Concord that you can do that on. Walden Pond is kind of a mob scene and White Pond is polluted. So do we have a lot of other ponds in the town?
Julia probably has a quantity of actual ponds. I can't speak to sites where residents go to specifically ice skate. I've seen it on McCone's Pond and some other small areas. Shameless plug for the recreation facilities strategic plan. We're trying to capture what these activities are that people are prioritizing in town, so we can have better data to support, collaborative decisions like this on which direction we should go.
So yes, so McCone's is definitely a popular pond for skating. White Pond also, I mean, there's a fair amount of ice skating on White Pond. I'm not as familiar with Walden in terms of ice skating. There's possibilities for ice skating at Hutchins and Fairyland, but I have not observed those activities. Be curious if others in town have.
Paul Jameson, College Road. There are a lot of other places where one can skate around in Concord. I think it seems to me the obvious solution is to remove the dam. Then Neshoba Brook then becomes, we're maintaining Neshoba Brooks as opposed to maintaining pond, which is an artificial creation that was created artificially by the dam in 1857. It just seems to me, I don't understand why we're so sort of slow to come to that solution. And I do have one detailed question. I don't understand why you can't get to the water from Commonwealth Avenue.
Under the dam removal
If the
alternative.
dam, yeah, under the dam removal.
Can we go back to that slide, Bert? So you could, but there would need to be a fairly long dock installed to get you across the new wetland that was formed.
Okay, thank you.
Pam Rockwell, 1810 Main Street. So I actually wanted to talk about dam removal, support dam removal, and talk about the financial aspects of that and fish passage. So I remember when we rebuilt the dam in 2007, we rebuilt the dam because a dam in Taunton buckled in 2005, and the state said, inspect and repair and replace all the dams. And so when we did it under duress. We had to do it right then. There were many, many people in Concord who wanted to, think about it, not do it, maybe build in some fish passage at the time, do the right thing. And the reality was we had to do it. We had to spend the money, even though maybe we could have put it off if we hadn't been forced to by the state at that point. There's another sword of Damocles coming for the dam, which is fish passage. So right now, there's a dam between Neshoba Brook and the Merrimack and the Atlantic Ocean. So the Neshoba Brook flows into Warner's Pond, flows into Neshoba Brook a little more, into the Assabet River, into the Concord River, into the Merrimack River, and into the Atlantic Ocean. And so when we talk about the fish passage that they're talking about feeder fish. Little fish, alewife, shad, herring that basically migrate up the river, spawn, and then migrate back down the river to the Atlantic Ocean, where they feed. They're the fish that tuna and cod and all the other big fish that we eat are they're being supplied by these fish. That's part of the reason that the fishing grounds are having problems maintaining the fish populations. It's one of those things along with global warming that's affecting the fishing community. So Mass Fisheries, Massachusetts Wildlife Marine Fisheries Division is actually trying to remove the dams that have limited these little fish from spawning and improve river conditions up the rivers so that they can basically renew this industry and do the right thing. The next dam down from us, between us, the only dam between Concord and the Atlantic Ocean right now is Talbot Dam in Billerica. Talbot Dam's a big dam. It's owned by a private person. It's been there also since the 1850s. Thoreau wanted it removed, but the Civil War got in the way. So now Talbot Dam is going to get removed. So in 2005, when the state said you need to fix your dam, no one was saying we needed to put in a fish ladder then. Nobody with any regulatory authority was doing that because there was still this dam between us and the water. In the next 10 years, Talbot Dam is coming down. So there is not going to be any excuse. The 6 dams that Mass Fisheries is targeting They are getting them removed. When they are done, they are coming after us. So at any time, just like the state saying, well, you have to repair your dam, the state could now say, you have to restore fish passage for these fish. And we would have to respond, and we would have to do that quickly. Now, in the meantime, there's a whole lot of money out there to support dam removal, fish spawning ground restoration. That $3 million that you were estimating for the cost of dam removal, maybe that's not really an accurate number, because that's not money that Concord might have to pay. We could take our time. We could actually plan something that's good for us to remove that dam now. And the state would be saying, yay, yay, we love you. Yes, you're getting ahead of the problem. When Talbot Dam comes down, they're not going to be saying, yay, yay. They're going to be saying, you pay for this, do it now. We need, they will make the choices about what will be dredged, what will be restored, where it will go. We should be doing this now. We should be doing this proactively, removing the dam and getting ahead of this problem. This is restoring the ecology, making the water free flowing, safer if we ever have to use it as an emergency water supply for some catastrophe, safer for the fish that are going to be moving back and forth, but also safe up and down for the whole ecosystem of Massachusetts. So I do think you need to think about that when you're really need to come up with numbers and estimates about how much it's really going to cost Concord, because that's an actual important part of it, is that we have this sort of Damocles. As long as we are owning a dam, somebody can come along and say, fix this dam, do it our way. And there's always going to be some agency, some group out there. That is a liability we don't want. And so adding that the help that we might get from doing it now, I think is a real advantage.
Great, thank you. And yeah, so that's a really good point. We didn't really talk about that in the presentation, but it will be kind of in the report. Basically, once the Talbot Mills Dam in Billerica is removed, which it's currently undergoing permitting to do, there won't be any barriers to fish passage between Warner's Pond and the Atlantic Ocean, other than the Warner's Pond Dam. So kind of an interesting situation. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of support as far as grant funding out there for dam removal projects. So definitely something to consider.
My name is David Frink. I currently live in West Concord, and I'm about to move to West Concord on Sunnyside, first right next to the pond. I'm okay with any of the three options personally, even though I'm going to be waterfront, maybe, but I'm okay with any of them. But my personal preference is dredging, not because of my property line, but because West Concord, I think, is gaining from the rail trail going through, the new park developments going in there. And I'd like to see West Concord recreational and economic grow from having that pond there. I'd rather see that pond turn into a swimming area than disappear. But that's just my personal.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for this presentation. It's really understandable and helpful. I'm Allison Ailey. I'm at 47 Warner Street, and I have two questions. They may be related. Is there any problem, and I really don't know, with the downstream distribution of the phosphorus that's now getting roadblocked in Warner's Pond to the rivers and everything else downstream? Like, if we take the dam away, and that stuff, all those tons starts flowing, and doesn't get stopped in Warner's Pond, which would be great for Warner's Pond. Is there a problem downstream that's going to come back to us somehow?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And then I wondered, based on it seems like there's an allocated 2.5 million somewhere to do that. And it also seems like there's funding out there to do the dam removal, because of all the reasons that everyone's talked about, is there some sort of combined opportunity to do some sort of both, where you dredge and take the dam away, and if there's no problem letting sediment flow, you take the dam away before you dredge, and some of it doesn't have to be relocated, it flows? And I have no idea, but I just wanted to say that it sounds like pieces could be juggled and maybe you could do both or some version of both.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll answer the second question first. I mean, in the context of what we're talking about for a dredging alternative, you know, the concept would be the pond remains a pond, and so how can we kind of manage it in a way that is providing some benefits? So you know, if the dam were to be removed, the pond would largely not be a pond anymore. So there wouldn't be a need to undertake a dredging project that is similar to what we've been talking about. That being said, you know, it's very possible that as part of the dredging or the dam removal project, there could be some kind of much smaller need to remove sediment from behind the dam, just to allow for the construction work to happen. But that's much different than the dredging project that kind of we talked about tonight. As far as the first part of your question, so if the dam removal option were to move forward, there would need to be some sediment transport modeling to look at exactly what volume of sediment would be expected to start moving downstream once the dam is removed. There would likely be some. And that's typically the case for dam removals where there's an impoundment that has a lot of sediment behind it. Basically, the short answer is that it kind of equals out over time. It's not really as much of a concern in flowing systems because they kind of naturally flush themselves out, and it's not just kind of like a basin where stuff is just accumulating and accumulating and accumulating over time. So, I mean, just as a, you know, a frame of reference, if you look at the latest DEP impaired waters report, you can see that Warner's Pond is impaired and Neshoba Brook, both upstream and downstream of the pond, is not listed as impaired. So there's obviously an issue with the pond itself, but I think, you know, the benefits of the dam removal from kind of a nutrient reduction perspective would outweigh any potential adverse impacts that.
The closest thing I can think of to what you're describing is fish passageway, but that wouldn't address the problem itself. It would address the pollution.
Sorry.
Oh, the closest thing is fish passage, but it wouldn't address the actual problem of nutrient loading. But
To do, sorry.
you were referring to flow and also maintaining a pond,
Right.
so that would be the closest thing.
Yeah, and I don't know, I know nothing, you all know so much more than I do, but in your picture, like, if you dredged and then let the pond and then let the brook, would it necessarily just go back down to the brook, or might it take?
Well, it depends on how much of the dam you remove. So we're assuming that the entire dam would be removed because that's kind of the standard that is used for kind of evaluating this as a restoration project. You could. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I don't know for certain, but I think it's about 5 or 6 feet. It's roughly the height of the dam. So yeah, I mean.
So, and Justin Richardson, our assistant town engineer, is on the call. I don't know, Justin, if you have anything additional that you would like to add to that?
I can add, currently the water level is approximately elevation 119. And basically the lowest point we have to release is about 113.5, so about 6.5 feet to our lowest release point. That's there, it may be lower than that, but that's as far as we know.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, a partial dam removal would, you're kind of not getting the benefits of a full dam removal, but, and you're still left with, you know, it just seems like it would almost be a worse situation than doing either of these on their own.
Right, I wasn't suggesting a partial dam removal, but maybe in my ignorance, I was wondering if you dredged and then remove the full dam, if somehow the area that you dredged, which is small relative to the pond, would become a larger brook, like the, you know.
Oh, I see. I see.
And you'd get the benefits of both the recreation
Yeah,
stuff and the fish passage and all of that.
okay, sorry.
But I don't
misunderstanding
know
the
if
question.
that's.
So, I mean, I guess the first thing is, you know, we are, you know, based on the conceptual designs, we are anticipating there'd be a roughly 4 to 5 acre open water pond that would remain under the dam removal alternative without needing to do any dredging. So, you know, could that area be made larger by dredging around it before the dam is removed? I guess in theory it could, but then you have the issue of what are you doing with that sediment? And it kind of adds a lot of cost and does the system kind of want to be that way, and will it kind of remain in a stable state once the dam is removed?
Right, I don't
Those
know,
would
I
kinda
just,
be the-
I live on the pond and I live on the area down towards the dam, and the way I see it being used is people coming to Commonwealth Ave in their boats or their, you know, their small things and fishing all along that corridor. I
Right.
don't know if they're Concord residents or not, or if that's something you want to keep going, but it seems like the dredging was trying to maintain that sort of recreational corridor. And I think down near the dam will probably stay accessible and deep because it flows, you know, it just flows there. I don't know that, but that's what it seems like. I know there'll be encroachment of the wetland. It will probably get narrower there, but I think it will still be available for fishing if people can access it. But I don't know. I just wanted to. It seems like there might be the financial means to do both and get the benefits of both. And if you did both, the cons from just doing dredging diminish because you've got the passage and the flow and the. But I don't know.
Thanks.
I'm John Coleman from 65 Central Street. It seems like with the dredging or non-dredging options, there's still the stream going through the pond. And the remainder of the pond, if it's the dams removed. And so the sediment will continue to come in and fill up the pond. I'm wondering if there's a possibility of maybe dredging, using the dredge spoils to separate the stream from the pond. And just short circuit the pond. Pond can exist then without any sediment coming in from the stream. And the stream can be sort of like a dam removal option. Just the sediment in the stream would continue on downstream. So I was wondering if that's an option.
I think the feasibility of that from both an engineering and permitting perspective is not high. And I think even if it could be done, separating the pond from the stream would cause some catastrophic ecological consequences. But that being said, it's probably not feasible just from an engineering standpoint because the sediment really doesn't want to be there blocking the stream, and it would just be kind of washed away and even if it could be done, I think it's very unlikely that the town would be able to get permits to do that.
I've seen that done in other towns, where they have a reservoir that's filling up rapidly with sediment. They just, bypass the reservoir with the stream so that they can have a pond that's unaffected by the sedimentation. So maybe I can give you a reference for other places where it's happened.
Sure, thanks.
Won't do that. Cynthia Katz, 20 Conant Street. Thanks for this evening's presentation. I guess sort of I'm thinking about the recreation department and the whole idea of a new recreational dock and other ideas of what is lost. And I just want to remind us that when we got the Giroux land, it was at the same time that White Pond Association gave to the town or sold to the town White Pond. And so the whole idea originally, because Giroux came first, that Giroux was going to be a swimming area and a big recreational area for the town. And that brought up a lot of questions about how was Warner's Pond going to be dealt with to allow for that kind of recreation. Then we got White Pond, and all of a sudden, the whole plan changed. And so I guess I'm not exactly sure, and maybe you can talk about this, what the goal is for recreation at Giroux and in this new little teeny 4 to 5 acres is a tiny pond compared to what I think all of us in West Concord who are used to going to Warner's Pond and skating with, kids and ourselves and having 2 access points, the Pond Street access point, which is conservation land that many of us go and throw our skates on and walk right on, or the other one on Commonwealth Ave, I call it the Purple House access. Does anyone live in the Purple House was here? And it's such a community area. That's not to say that something else isn't going to happen. And a bunch of years ago, we also dredged the pond. Now, I don't think or know that what happened, what Concord did years ago is similar to what is proposed in the dredging plan. But that clearly didn't really do much. So I guess one question is, what's the idea for recreation at Giroux in that 4.5 acre pond? I hate the idea of losing Warner Pond as a skating pond for kids and adults and babies and everybody who uses it.
So just to jump in before Anna responds to the question about plans for Giroux. Fairyland Pond is about 3 acres, and Hutchins is probably about 6 acres. So the remaining pond would be between the size of Fairyland and Hutchins, just to sort of give a visual perspective of
What's McConey? How big is that?
Macomb. I didn't look at that. I'll look it up now as I mean, I don't want to step on Anna's toes. It's Giroux is recreation property, but I think when the former deputy town manager was looking and gathering information on what the uses were going to be at Giroux, there was a lot of outreach like we're doing here, and there were surveys and what do people want to see, and one of the options was swimming, but I didn't understand that swimming was ever identified as that is going to be a use. And you're right, White Pond sort of came in after that, and it does have a swimming beach at a glacial kettle hole pond. Whereas Warner's it's an impoundment and so I don't know what the decisions are. Maybe Anna, if you should have wanted.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the questions. So, like Delia said, when the previous deputy town manager started these conversations on what the Giroux property would look like and what it would be used for, discussions certainly were had of could swimming be an option. I wasn't initially part of the original discussion, so I can't speak verbatim, but part of the issue, I think, with conceptually considering swimming was the plant growth that was happening, and people wouldn't want to swim in what its current state and what potentially it could become due to the phosphorus loading. And if we were to continue to remove I believe it's water chestnut, you said they predicted that the sediment would be that like your feet sink into the clay feeling ground and people just wouldn't enjoy it. So the priority shifted back towards White Pond and the beach that was already established there. In terms of other recreation opportunities at Giroux, I think there's a wonderful opportunity for passive recreation, and that's what the design is really worked to include, with accessible walking trails, a pavilion, a restroom, so people could go and watch birds or do nature activities or read a book. So it's definitely designed, in my opinion, as a beautiful passive recreation space with the opportunity potentially to enjoy fishing via the dock, water access, at certain points. Whether this is the final place where a dock would go, I can't say, but I think the intent is to continue to provide visual and some physical access to the water, whether it's the pond or a brook or whatever it becomes.
And
Can I
Sorry.
follow up? I mean, I keep coming back to skating. I don't know why, but I see Warner's Pond less as because I'm not a fisher person. But I do see people doing that, but it just seems like to lose the skating piece for the West Concord community. No, it's a tough nut, even though, the idea of, bringing it back to a marshy kind of wetlands thing is.
So in response to your question on the size of Macone, it's about 3.5 acres of open water. So
Skating is not a
absolutely would be a possibility at under either alternative. There would absolutely be the ability to skate from Giroux. Probably not from other access points unless the brook froze, which is less likely, especially under our current climate conditions. But if the winter was that ponded area in the northern part of the pond by Giroux would, theoretically freeze over under the right, conditions.
And the dock would be the only access point. Is that what the vision is?
I think that is.
I mean, for ice skating, you can access wherever.
Walk in.
Yeah, you can the dock is really more for open water access into the pond.
Thank you.
So I just want to Allison, I know you've been waiting patiently. I just want to let the people who are attending virtually know that we have not forgotten about you. Allison, if you want to ask your question, and then I'm going to go to the Zoom folks here.
Great. Thank you very much. I will be short, and it isn't even a question, so it'll be super short. I'm Allison Kiljoom. I'm the executive director of OARS, which is the watershed organization for the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord rivers. And we're located in West Concord. And we're also the project manager for the removal of the Talbot Mills Dam in Billerica. So we are very much involved in that. And what is expected is that in 2024, the dam would be removed. That depends on everything going smoothly, but that is the current schedule. So our view of dam removal is really that it's very, very case specific. Every dam is different. Every community is different. Dams serve different functions. And so we're very interested to hear what people have to say. really excellent presentation and work that's been done up to this point. Overall, we know that free-flowing streams and rivers are healthier. And especially with climate change, the water's getting hotter. It becomes quite inhospitable for a lot of aquatic life when water is impounded behind dams. So the benefit of dam removal is for fish to be able to come up from the Gulf of Maine. And as well, it's to the benefit of our resident local fish, like wild eastern brook trout and that kind of thing, so that it can benefit both the migratory species as well as our local species. So I just wanted to say that I think it might be wise, if you're looking at the dredging option, to include in the pricing restoring fish passage, if you're keeping the dam, to add to the cost of that option, adding fish passage at the dam. So that's a suggestion in terms of looking at the overall global budgeting, because I think that will be an issue coming up. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. So we do have a number of comments on the Q&A function, and I think a number of them have been answered. Some of them came, early on as during the presentation. So I'm wondering if I could ask people who would like to ask a question via Zoom, if you can use the raise hand function, and I can sort of call on you, and I see a hand, two hands. Okay, very good. I'm going to open it up to Phil Brewer, if you would like to ask your question.
Hi, thank you can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for this informative presentation. Two questions. One, it looks like there may be some grant funding for something like a dam removal. I'm wondering if there's any potential for funding for the dredging that is also being considered. Secondly is, just like with the Big Dig project, when that was done in Boston, I believe a lot of that sediment was put on one of the harbor islands. So I'm wondering if it has been considered to use two of our three islands, not Scout Island, but use the other two as a potential place for sediment to be stored to enlarge that potential area.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. So unlike the dam removal alternative, there's really no existing grant programs that really are specific to dredging, or really even include dredging as sort of a type of project that can receive funding. They're really just viewed pretty differently from funding agencies, and so the short answer to the first part of your question is no, there aren't. As far as the second part, so as you mentioned, the pond does have three islands, the Scout Island by far being the largest. So I think, I don't know of any precedent for sort of an inland dredging project for kind of placing material on an island within the pond. I think there would be a lot of engineering and regulatory concerns with that. And I also don't think that the islands, even if that could be done, are really large enough to accommodate more than just sort of a relatively small proportion of the material that would be dredged. For example, the second largest island after Scout Island is like 2/3 of an acre. And the dredge footprint is 4 acres. So, and we're moving up to 4 feet of sediment. So just to give you a sense of the scale there.
I would also add that they're vegetated now. They have, trees and shrubs on them now. So that would all have to be taken off to allow the new sediment to be placed there. We did, when we were looking at the initial limited dredging possibility, we were looking at what could we do with this sediment? And we did ask, I'm sure many of you are aware at the former Star Met site at 2229 Main Street. They're going to be filled, they're looking for a lot of fill to bring in, and we did ask them, here, we have all the sediments. And they said, no, thanks, it's muck. It is that there's no, it's so unconsolidated that they have no interest in it whatsoever. So we were going to, the prison was going to accept it and use it for composting. And one of the questions in the chat was, would somebody buy it? Well, we could give it away, and that would make it that we wouldn't have those disposal costs, but nobody's gonna buy we have not been able to find any takers to buy, that volume of what we were looking at. Thank you, Phil, for those questions.
Thank you.
I am seeing Enid, I'm sorry, let me, Enid, if you want to ask your question, I think you're able to join us.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. There has been a lot of discussion this evening about fish. However, we live on the pond, and it would break my heart for it to go away, but if that's what happens, that's what happens. However, we have a lot of waterfowl on the pond. We have resident swans, we have geese, we have ducks of many kinds. There are snakes, there are turtles. What happens to all of that if you take the dam away?
That's a great question, and I know everybody loves the swans. They're invasive, but they're so mean to the other waterfowl too. But I know, so swans, are much more of a ponds bird than some of the other ones. I mean, behind our building at 141 Pies Road, we have the rivers, right there, and there are so many, it's a lot of mallards, but there's occasionally, wood and black duck that are, flocking up there. And so you do see a lot of waterfowl and Great Meadows, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with. I mean, that is one of the best, there's so many waterfowl, and also, a lot of shorebirds, rails and, all kinds of different waterfowl, including a lot of rare species, because they have, a lot of diversity of habitats there. And I don't know that would, be the case at Warner's Pond, but you would not lose there'd be herons that you would see. So I think that there would still be a lot of waterfowl that you would observe. And the other thing that we didn't really talk about in the presentation is that there are wood duck wood turtle that are north of Warner's Ponds, and there is certainly the ability under the dam removal option that then provides really good habitat for a state listed, rare species, which is not currently a habitat that's provided. We have a lot of snappers and we have a lot of painted turtles, but there's the possibility that habitat would improve for the wood turtle. Mark Howell. Hi.
Give you the answer I expected.
Hi, Delia. Thanks for the session. It's really informative. I believe you characterize the depth of the pond as being about 12 feet currently, and I'm wondering, under the dam removal option, what could you give us a sense of sort of the depth and character of the remaining 4 pond area? Is it 12 minus 6 feet, and so we could expect something that's relatively shallow, or what might that be like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably about right. So, if the water elevation is being reduced by about 6 feet, the deep hole of the pond is about 12 feet right now. So the kind of that slice of the pond that would remain underwater would have about 6 feet of water in it.
I guess I'm maybe just to follow up a little bit, I live on a Nersnack Hill, and of course we have the Nersnack Pond, which, you know, at its deepest is 8 or 9 feet, and much of it is in that sort of depth range, and what we see there is a pretty constant struggle with aquatic plants as it is. And so is it the flow that would result that would sort of keep that at bay? Is that what you expect? Because certainly a Nersnack Pond is, you know, always at risk of being overrun by aquatic plants.
Yeah, so, you know, the flow would definitely help. But, you know, I guess the other thing to keep in mind is that there's about 30 acres of Warner's Pond now that's overrun by dense aquatic invasives. So, you know, just to put in perspective as far as kind of where we are right now. But it certainly could be a concern, but I think the flow would help, and having a much smaller area to manage if it was something that needed to be done in the future would make that a lot more feasible than trying to manage the entire pond now.
Okay, thank you for the information.
Hello, Frederick McWilliams.
Yes, Fred McWilliams, 196 Wright Road. Yeah, I've been paying attention to this subject for quite some time, as you might know, and I have a number of questions. And like you said, some of them have been answered, but not necessarily fully. And I'm not going to repeat the whole question. But one of the questions I had, we kept on talking about dam maintenance costs. What is the annual maintenance cost associated with maintaining that dam as it exists? That's question one. I have a couple others.
Great, thank you. I think Justin can respond to that.
Yep, so current maintenance costs is mostly labor for Highway and Grounds Division. However, every 2 years, we have to prepare an emergency action plan, which we and pay a consultant to provide training to our Highway and Grounds Division. That's typically around about $2,000 every 2 years, and then every 5 years we have to prepare a it's called a phase 1 inspection and evaluation report, and typically that's on the range of about $5,000. So those are our hard costs for that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So basically, this has been a recurring cost that we've been maintaining now for quite some time. Thank you.
Correct.
So with regards to other funding agencies, I mean, that was proposed by Phil Brewer in terms of looking for opportunities for dredging funds. And the answer was really related, came back as, well, there's no real mechanism for that. But the point of the matter is, if you don't ask, if you don't propose a specific project, then it's not going to be there. There may not be per se a line item funded action item by either EPA, DEP, or some other organization. But if you don't ask, it will never happen. And I would strongly encourage the community to think about that as an option for dredging, to look for funding and kind of sort of thinking sort of outside of the box, as it would be said. The other aspect is with regards to current maintenance items. There was one of the answers was given the fact that we did try to do some herbicide treatments. You know, I don't recall that was also included the hydroraking actions, but these were all considered some of the options in the overall management plan. And really the question is, how effective were they? And if they weren't really that effective on a one-time treatment, you know, has consideration been, well, try it again? And if that's indeed the case, are there any reports to that effect? Because certainly there isn't any on the website. So I'd be really interested to see what the efficacy of that process was and what the outcome versus the actual cost for doing so. And then the other part of that is overall maintenance. I mean, so the OR group, in terms of cleaning up the Concord rivers, the Assabet rivers, and everything else, has really put together a fairly strong grassroots organization to help maintain the cleanness of that. And although there was a significant effort done in the early 2000s, late 2000s, primarily led by Joanne Loyne, with regards to really trying to do, grassroots pulling of chestnuts and things such as that, that kind of sort of went to by the wayside. And maybe now's the time to perhaps invigorate that process and to see if we can gain any leverage. Now, granted, it still doesn't answer the questions associated with sediment or phosphorus, but the other aspect associated with phosphorus, is there any consideration for trying to, there's probably no way that we could reduce sediment flow. That is absolutely correct, just because of the large wetland baseline area that we're dealing with. But with respect to phosphorus, there really hasn't been, from what I've been able to read, what the absolute source terms are. And if it's associated with the prison farm, then the question that might come about is, can we look to the state for funding for perhaps reducing phosphorus loading into our area? So that's kind of sort of it in a nutshell. Sorry for the long rant, but thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think Delia can address some of the questions related to past aquatic plant management, but I'll just address two of your questions quickly. So as far as grant funding sources, I mean, the way that these work is it's never just kind of an open-ended, like, tell us your idea and then we might give you money. It's always a very prescriptive, there's a particular program that comes out, if there's a certain amount of money and it's designated to fund certain types of projects. And in some cases, it's specific to dam removal. So, dam removal projects are competing against each other to get funding. In other cases, it may be more of like, a community resilience in the case of the MVP program, things that are enhancing the, climate resilience and reducing vulnerabilities in municipalities. So there's always criteria and sort of types of projects that any one grant program will fund. And so the point of that was just, there really aren't any programs currently that list, dredging of freshwater ponds to provide recreational improvements as a type of project that they're interested in funding. So that's the challenge there. And then as far as nutrient inputs and specific sources and could they be reduced, just going back to the watershed management plan and some of the conclusions there, like we talked about earlier in the presentation, one of them was, even if phosphorus loading to the pond could be reduced by 80%, which would be a huge number given the size of the pond's watershed, that the remaining in-pond levels would still be likely to contribute to water quality issues. So it's kind of, once you're talking about that end of things, it's kind of reducing the source and also taking the existing sediment out of the pond. And both of those things would really be needed to kind of address the issues from that standpoint.
Makes sense. In regards to, those are great questions about what prior efforts have been done, and starting with the herbicide. So that was something that sometimes in some pond systems where you have aquatic nuisance plants, that is an opportunity to control them. The issue with Warner's Pond is that it still sort of shocks me. So the water that is in Warner's Pond today will not be there 24 hours from now. It has it's called the flush rate. That water is in and out of the pond within 24 hours, which is sort of unbelievable. But that sort of explains why the herbicide approach doesn't work, because it needs to be having enough contact with the plants to have the damage to kill plants. The herbicide issue is also problematic because then all of that biomass is then going down and becoming part of the sediment problem and nutrient loading as well. Fred, you brought up Joanne Lloyd, and I'm glad you did. She was a powerhouse and she really motivated, huge invasives, water chestnut removal efforts at Warner's Pond. We have continued with our summer crew to go in and get water chestnut out. As the pond has continued to fill in over time, the challenges are that the water chestnut, by the time it's ready to harvest, it's very difficult to get into a lot of the ponds because it's just choked with, it's so late, it's, sort of July, and the navigability of the pond is very difficult, if not impossible, in some of the areas of the ponds. Hydro raking was done, I think, in the early 2000s. That was before my time. The problem with hydro rake, it can be effective for some types of invasives, but for others, it has the opposite effect. And we have we've got water chestnut, we have water lilies, we've got milfoil, we have fanwort, and certainly milfoil and fanwort are two that are exacerbated by hydro raking, because what happens is they get chopped up and then all of those fragments then become new plants. So it's very, so those were evaluated, in some cases tried, but they're not recommended. Another option, I'm not sure if you mentioned or asked about this, but was the drawdown. And Alex would be able to sort of respond much more eloquently than I could about why the pond characteristics at Warner's are not suitable for an effective drawdown.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, drawdown is a technique that's used in some water bodies, both for managing aquatic plants and also protecting shoreline infrastructure during the winter. And so basically what happens is you release a lot of water from the dam and it basically just drops the elevation of the pond. You keep it that way throughout the winter, typically is when it's done. And then in the following spring, you let the pond fill back up. And the idea from a plant management perspective is that within the drawdown zone, so the area of the pond that's exposed now under the drawdown condition, any plants that are growing there are now exposed to the freezing air temperatures and will die. That's how it works in theory. The issue with Warner's Pond is several things. So just from a regulatory standpoint, DEP really doesn't allow drawdowns any deeper than 3 feet anymore. You used to be able to do deeper ones, but they're sort of reining that in. So the benefits would really be limited to the part of the pond where water depths are 3 feet or less. Another issue is that it's really dependent on weather conditions, which are obviously variable. If a drawdown had happened this winter, it probably would not have been very effective because it's been pretty warm. So it's very possible that you could do the drawdown and not really see much benefit. The sediments in the pond are also pretty soft and mucky, which tends to retain water, which also limits the effectiveness of drawdown because plants are able to survive even if they're exposed. So there's just a lot of factors that kind of go into how successful drawdown is, and it can be successful in some specific situations, but it's not likely to be here.
May I follow up on that?
Briefly, yes, we do have a number of people who still have not yet had an opportunity to speak. So.
Oh, no, certainly understand. But briefly on the drawdown, what I don't understand is why would the DEP or other funding agency not allow you to draw down below that level, but yet still condone or support a dam removal, which effectively does the same thing? So I'm kind of sort of missing that point. And then the last question, my apologies, and that has to do with Scout Island. So Scout Island is a deeded property to the Boy Scouts, which is now managed through the Concord Scout House. And really the question is, by doing the dam removal or other things, you're basically denying access to a deeded property. And how is that going to be addressed?
So I guess to the first question, I mean, most regulatory agencies view dam removal as very beneficial ecologically because you're removing kind of an artificial thing in the environment and kind of restoring the system to the way that it naturally wants to be. Drawdown is kind of a management tool that can be used in water bodies, and the reason that there's a limit to how far drawdown can happen is because there are negative impacts associated with doing drawdown. So obviously you can imagine it decreases the volume of water available for fish and other aquatic life that live in the pond. There, can be dissolved oxygen implications of that. And so there's limits, to limit kind of the adverse effects of drawdown. I mean, to be honest, drawdown, I think is really more useful as kind of something that's done on ponds with a lot of recreational docks to prevent ice damage, or where there's a lot of retaining walls or kind of other infrastructure that if freezing water contacted it, there could be damage more so than a plant control technique.
Thanks for the questions, Fred.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm going to just we've got two people here at the mic, and then I'll go back to Zoom.
Thank you, Delia. Carlin Reed, 83 Whitsand. We've been hearing a lot about options 1 and 2, but almost nothing about option 3, which is do nothing, keep it at the status quo. We also haven't heard about what's the reason for the urgency to act now instead of next year or maybe 2 years from now. If you can address why now, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, we have been moving forward slowly on efforts to do restoration at Warner's Pond for a number of years. And to me, it doesn't feel like it's why now, or that it's something right now, because we have been involved in doing efforts to address the ongoing eutrophication at the ponds. It doesn't have to be right now. I mean, it could be next year, it could be 5 years. It's, what the community feels is the right time frame for it, but the ecological values and recreational capacity will continue to decline. And we do get a lot of, we hear from a lot of people that there's just not a lot of opportunities at Warner's Pond anymore. The nexus of the Giroux parcel and, the completion of the Bruce Freeman lend itself to this is a logical time to be improving Warner's Pond. And if we, pulled the trigger on saying we were going to remove the dam today, then it's a year of permitting. It's, probably, it would be a few years out before a project would become, an active project. And I'm sorry, the first question. Okay. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Doug Gifford, 562 Harrington Ave. I've had an association with Warner's Pond for 30 years or more. In particular, the dam, I want to speak to my favorite little dam that is a very stable and low maintenance structure. It has a little overflow founded on rock, and then there's an earth embankment section. If it were to be removed, I would guess that a large backhoe operating there would take care of it in a day's work to chop through it and let the water out. So the removal is almost inconsequential. But if we were to maintain it, if there is a demand for fish passage, the height of the dam is not great. We talked about 5 or 6 feet. And I don't see why some small fish passage ladder wouldn't be appropriate for the
the structure, and then people could observe the little fishies going upstream. And I think that would be a good neighborhood project. I personally would like to maintain the water surface and be able to use what is available, fishing. I've been out there on my canoe, and right now you can't paddle through the lily pond. It's just impenetrable. So I would like to see it improved and dredged. And I'd like to see if there's some way to make that dredging happen as they did for the Central Artery in Boston Harbor. I found a place to utilize the spoil, and it was a benefit to both parties. And then I also was thinking about, I suppose that's it, but making sure that we have a place to go with it. And another thought was phosphorus loading. It seems like that's coming from our neighbors. When we have 600 and something acres, that's mostly, or probably Acton. Why don't we go to them and say what's happening? And say, we'd like some help in remediating the damage you're doing to our pond. And see if there's some joint effort that could, and I don't know if that's been explored, but financially, that might reduce the burden on us. I know in some cases, for contamination problems, there have been little rock dams placed in streams with filter material embedded in the dam, like a screen door. So as the water comes through, contaminants are removed. And I'm wondering if there isn't something like that available for the phosphorus treatment, where we could filter out that phosphorus on the way in. I think you said that it was maybe 14 cubic yards of material. That doesn't strike me as a big volume. That's a couple of dump trucks. And if we could find a way to create a little filter system, we could remove that material and eradicate the problem from the phosphorus. So those are my comments.
Thanks.
Thank you. Turning back to Zoom, hello, Maureen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Unfortunately, we were not able to join the meeting at the beginning. And I was wondering, will the recording of this meeting be available on the Concord Mass Gov website? And if so, when and where?
Yes, it will. It is being recorded right now, and the recording will be provided to Minuteman Media Network, and they generally put those up within a couple of days. We will, so it will be available on the Minuteman Media YouTube channel. Are you familiar with that? It's where all the town meetings are posted that have been recorded. I think we could also put it on our Natural Resources Division page, so that if you're not able to find the Minuteman, I think I can put that link on our website, right?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. If you are having difficulty finding it, Maureen, feel free to reach out to me sort of in a couple of days, and we'll make sure.
Okay, just the other comment I wanted to make is we received the postcard, which was very nice to receive. But then there was an image of the postcard on the website, but you couldn't click on the URL and get right in. So that very, very, very long URL had to be read from one of us to the other and typed in. It doesn't link directly. I didn't know if you
recognize that. We have fixed that so that on the website, if you go to the Division of Natural Resources or the Warner's Pond page, there's a link that is clickable that you can go to the website.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Very welcome. I think, is this Priscilla Guiney?
Okay.
Unmute. Yes, Priscilla Guiney, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I've lived on Warner's Pond. I live on Wright Road for a number of years. And just as somebody who lives close to it, I'm wondering about one source of phosphorus from the farm fields that are very close to the pond, if that's being addressed. Secondly, there is beaver activity that is quite strong in the northwest area, and I wonder if that might change some of your projections for how deep the pond will be in the future, because they're certainly active in the ecosystem nearby. And I'm wondering also if there is some way to address filtration issues with introducing more wetland plants, if there's actually natural ways to restore the nutrient load within Warner's Pond. Okay, so those are my basic questions, looking at the farmland, beaver activity, and natural mitigation efforts for improving water quality. And then one other question that's not as related. I thought one of the initial intents of the Giroux property was to have active boating taking place. And I've heard about fishing, ice skating, but I thought it was also meant to be an active recreational boating pond. And that's why the dock was being built. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Thanks. So the best information we have about nutrient loading and kind of nutrient issues related to Warner's Pond comes from the 2012 watershed management plan. There was an effort to do some sampling and modeling that kind of created the results that we have and the information we have related to this. I don't think there was really an effort to necessarily pinpoint exact sources or say, how much sediment loading is coming from this property or another property. It would be fairly difficult to do, but I guess the fact that there is an agricultural field next to Warner's Pond, certainly, a few people have brought it up, but I guess I would just reiterate, the size of the watershed compared to the pond is it's over 600 times the size of the pond. And so that the entire 47 square mile area, nutrient loading that's originating within that is ultimately making its way to the pond. So, just for a sense of scale there, as far as what we're talking about, as far as sources. So as far as the beaver question, I think your question is it possible that beaver activity could raise the elevation of the water surface of the pond under kind of existing conditions and thus make the pond deeper and easier to navigate around? Was that your question?
No, just my question is that they actually are active in the northwest area, and they certainly may move about with changes to the wetlands. So they may start encroaching on that future little tiny pond if the dams are moved. And just wondering, are you taking into account how things may change based on the wildlife moving about and migrating, that you may have different water depths changed by the beaver in particular, and it could move. It may not allow for that tiny pond to be where you would like it to be. It may move somewhere else based on their activity.
Yeah, so beavers are certainly in the pond. There's a couple of beaver lodges that are there now, and they're obviously native wildlife that and they do a lot of things in nature and make water go in different places. So if beavers were to build a dam, I guess upstream of this little pond, it probably wouldn't affect that open water body itself. It would probably make potentially could make another kind of beaver pond upstream of that dam. And then if they were to build a dam downstream of this open water area, then potentially that could enlarge in the size of the open water area that we're kind of envisioning for the dam removal. So yeah, it's certainly a wild card, and it's hard to predict what beavers are going to do, but I think that would probably be part of the adaptive management phase of the dam removal alternative, is kind of just being on the lookout for those types of issues. And then I'm sorry, what was the third question?
It was about boating. I thought originally the intent for the Giroux property was really to encourage active canoeing as well as boating of other types. And it seems now it will be a much smaller area. And I'm just curious about if there's really a big interest in allowing for that still.
Sure, I'm happy to take that question. Thanks for that. You can't think about Warner's Pond without thinking about the Giroux property and the Giroux property without Warner's Pond. So it certainly is intertwined in the effects of this project and how it will affect the access points at Giroux. I think one thing to consider in looking at the designs on the screen right now is that while you may lose some open pond space, you'll have miles of access downstream that boats, kayaks, canoes will now be able to travel where they currently cannot. So it's a bit of a subjective opinion on, you know, what sort of boating and kayaking you may prefer. But I do think that the goal will continue to be healthy, sustainable access to the water. It may just be a different shape and have different access points.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, coming back to the mic.
Dan Stapleton, 20 Conant. I have a question, but you don't have to answer it now, but it could be a future presentation. But on the dam removal option, when you were presenting it, I was kind of in my mind thinking like a Great Meadows experience. You know, you can go down and you'll walk around. That occurred to me. I think what I would like to understand in a future presentation, what are the land ownership implications?
What are
The land ownership, what is a town owned versus what is a private property owned? We created more developable property. Because as a pond, you still have kind of access, right? You get on the water and you have access. But where we look at in West Concord where it's developed, you have essentially no visual access, nothing. You just got 4,000 square foot homes kind of blocking it. So I'd like to kind of see that perspective on the dam removal option in like a future presentation. What kind of amenity actually would it be?
right? And we are.
Trails going through it, or is it just gonna be, we got a couple of 3 little minor points where you can sit at a bench and look out, you know?
We will have more information for the next meeting on that. We will, including additional renderings that show sort of at grade from some of the public access points. The entire footprint of Warner's Pond Dam is owned by the town.
So up to like the water.
Where the approximate current water line is, yes. That will continue to be owned by the town. Yeah. Okay.
Pam Rockwell, Main Street. I wanted to address the fish ladder and the contributions by Acton. So in the planning for the Talbot Mills dam removal, they looked at putting in fish ladders. And the problem with fish ladders is it's not like you put in a fish ladder and the fish just climb it and you never have to think about it. You have to actively maintain it and keep it clear. You get a lot of dead fish on it that you still have to remove and deal with. It's not a happy place for fish. It's just, and it is very species specific. So you can fix one problem with that, but you are not going to be restoring the whole ecological balance of the river system with that. And the second thing was Acton actually did a lot of work in the early 2000s to improve the phosphorus in the Neshoba Brook. They built a wastewater treatment plant, and all of the businesses and people along Neshoba Brook and along Fort Pond Brook were put on sewers instead of failing septic systems. So they think they've already done a lot of work to help us out with that. They're not going to be giving us more money for that.
Thanks, ma'am. This. Hi. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry, did you? Yes, oh no, please, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you're saying. Please do, yes.
Hi, my name is Michael Dressler. I live at 37 Maple Court, West Concord. All I was hoping for, I mean, just so much information, it's a lot to process, but when we envision the downstream from the dam, I mean, I'm an outdoors person. I mean, I know this area really, really, really well. And so I'm having a hard time visualizing. I know it's bringing it back to its natural state, and I'm probably more for the concept of removing the dam. But I can't envision what it's like behind it when we're talking about this. You know, you can go miles downstream and upstream. I mean, right now it's the area behind the dam, I mean, behind the Showboat Bakery is tiny. So if the water levels can rise at all, and I've seen it rise, you know, I mean, it's going over into a whole other portion of land that normally is dry. So I don't know if you know kind of where I'm going with this, and you can't, I mean, the water level would have to rise pretty high for you to be able to utilize that as a canoe or kayak up and, you know, down and back. Because right now it's like, you're just gonna get beat up by rocks.
Right.
So I just can't, so again, it's not meant to be a challenging question, it's just meant to be, I can't visualize downstream from the dam. Because and the reason for that question is because, like a lot of people here talk about don't want to lose this wonderful ice skating sanctuary, which it is. You mean, you can feel like it's Mystery Alaska, although I couldn't do it this year once. You know what I mean? So if that's what we're in for the future, well, then we're protecting something for a winter reason that we may or may not have moving forward. Right? And then in the warm, and then so the question is, when can we use this? Like in the warmer months, it's like, I don't want to go over there. It's like disgusting, you know, it's all marshy and whatever else. So yeah, if this whole concept of freeing water, and your point about 20 foot, you know, the movement of the water already, it sounds pretty good. You're saying the herbicides wouldn't work because the water's moving.
Right.
So then if you're to open everything up and it's moving that much better, does it make sense? So in other words, like, yeah, the benefit would be that, wow, okay, we can paddle from Stop and Shop down to, you know, the fork, paddle upstream, you know, all the way up to Acton, right? But I just can't get the part behind the bakery.
Understood. It's very shallow right now, and at times there is no flow. When, you know, we were in a drought for a lot of last year, and there was, you know, it was puddles of dying fish. Upstream of the pond, Neshoba Brook is much deeper. So I don't have a good answer for you now. But I understand that concern. What's interesting to me is when we were sort of initially talking about this, and we talked about downstream of the dam and, you know, that reach between, you know, the bridge and the Assabet, you know, and I was thinking, oh, it's probably like 20 feet wide. It's 40 feet wide there, which is kind of stunning to me that, you know, I mean, it just doesn't feel like that right now. And I don't know if that's related to just the very shallowness of it, but Alex, I don't know if you have any thoughts about if the dam were taken out, what that would mean for the depth with that sort of more free flowing condition or not. It's something that we need to.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the thinking is that when a dam is removed, there's not that much change in water elevation downstream compared to what it is before the removal. On the other hand, if there's kind of areas where material has been accumulating within the channel downstream, that could be flushed out by the dam removal, both just the initial pulse of water and then just improved flows in the long term. You know, the depth definitely varies. You know, I think closer to like the rail trail bridge, it's probably more like 5 feet, but it's really dependent on time of year. It's really dependent on whether we're in a drought or not a drought. So, you know, will it be a smooth paddle all the time? Probably not, but sometimes probably. It's just hard to say really without, because it's so variable, you know, even now, just year to year. I think, you know, if the dam removal option moves forward, there would be a more detailed survey of the downstream channel to really get a handle on kind of what the bathymetry is like now. And that would go into the modeling that would help kind of show what it would be like if the dam were removed.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the question. I don't see any hands on Zoom raised anymore, and I don't see any more people coming to the mic, but one last question.
I think it'd be nice to be able to see potential of what these options would be. The recreation area on the north end, right? And I look at all the wetlands and they're beautiful and the birds and the wildlife being there. But could we see that you were talking about trails, but any boardwalks through there, it'd be easier to accept the change. If we were seeing what we were gonna get. And if it's just wildlife, that's fine, right? But we could talk about the, what's it called? The Great Prairie, no, the
Great Meadows.
Great Meadows. If that's what we're having in our head and we walk away and we don't get the boardwalks, we don't get that's not really, is that what we're gonna see maybe 20 years from now? Or from the recreation point of view?
Sure.
I'd like to see that vision,
Mhm.
whether or not that manifests.
Yeah, I mean, for the purposes of this kind of conceptual design, we included a dock at Giroux and for the dam removal, a couple of observation platforms, but the reality is that the recreational improvements can be whatever the town wants them to be, and that's.
So those of us who live near it, it'd be nice to say that, and in years from now, this is what it could be, if we fund it, if we kind of aim for it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a great question and something for us to think about. I mean, Alex is right, I mean, what the town wants to see is in part what drives what, we can accomplish, then also what, permitting parameters there are, what funding, parameters, but I think that's something that, we can and, should look at in terms of how, the recreational piece and the open space piece can, continue to be, another nexus. I think it's a good point.
Yeah, and for those that haven't gone in there and seen the progress on the park so far, I'll see if we can get some pictures without snow, so you can get an idea of what the pathways do currently look like, although there's still work to be done, as visually you can tell. We'll try and get some better photos potentially for the next presentation, so people can see what that looks like now.
I will remark there.
Sure, great.
Can I ask a question about Giroux? Sure. So every time I walk at Giroux a lot, and whenever I walk there and I look out at the pond from the trail closest to the pond, and I see beyond the fence that's been put up, that there's still a lot of poor things.
Right, the erosion controls.
Yeah. What's the plan for those being?
Well, so ultimately, I mean, there are some contractual issues that are being worked out right now, so the project has been a little bit on hold until those get resolved. Those erosion controls remain in place until the site is stable, so, we would need to go out and take a look and see, whether that's, but that's usually at the completion of the project, so it is, they will come out. Eventually, the project will be completed, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I don't have an answer for you on when those will come out.
So what's the date? What's the goal for the project completion?
It's, the hope is to have it completed ASAP. I mean, it's past the due date, but there's just been some, conversations that are ongoing that need to get resolved.
Great job.
I'm sorry?
It's a great job.
Yeah, it looks great. It looks really good. Yeah, thank you. So I really do want to thank everybody for coming. Alex doing a tremendous presentation and all of your great questions. I really appreciate it. So thanks very much, and fill out the survey if you haven't done so already, and we will see you at the next community meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much.